Henry stopped, but he refused to turn around. He was definitely breathing now. His chest moved in and out erratically. His body felt hot, but it wasn't the summer heat. Maybe the boy wasn't dead at all, he thought. Maybe he was just asleep, and he just happened to stumble upon him. Yes, that's it. It had to be it, Henry thought. He gathered himself, took a deep breath, and turned around, hoping to prove just how silly he thought he had been. He turned around and saw the boy laying there again. He knew his eyes had not deceived him. The boy definitely was dead. His eyes were now open, and he had a lazy smirk on his face, but no doubt he was dead. Henry didn't move a muscle. He just stared at him. The boy's blurry, glazed-over eyes fixed on Henry like a lifeless doll. "What's your name?" he asked, but Henry said nothing, still in a state of shock and disbelief. He just stood there, slack-jawed and wide-eyed. "I'm Brandon," the boy said. I am Henry," he stuttered. Brandon's lips pulled back, revealing a dull-toothed smile. His teeth looked wooden. His gums were dark and looked dried out. This only made Henry feel more uneasy. He was actually talking to a corpse. "What are you up to, Henry?" he asked. "I was just crawfishing," Henry said cautiously. Brandon never moved. He just laid there looking up at Henry with his dead eyes. "Oh, I like fishing, but I've never been crawfishing though. I come out here to pick blackberries. My grandma will make a blackberry pie if I make enough of them. She makes them really good." The park was known for its vast berry bushes that lined the gates and clustered the back of the park near the pond. Blackberries, huckleberries, and even some plum trees that produced by far anything sweeter than what you find at a grocery store. But blackberries were the furthest thing from Henry's mind now. All that existed was the mystery before him. "Do you like blackberries, Henry?" Brandon's glazed-over eyes widened with excitement as he asked. Yeah, I guess so." Henry's words were coming faster now. The wind blew again and carried Brandon's scent with it. Henry put his hand over his nose and tried to block the smell. There must be something dead around here," Brandon said. "It smells like a dead hippopotamus," he chuckled, showing his dull teeth. The joke actually made Henry chuckle a bit himself, and then into full-blown laughter, along with Brandon. Henry, though still afraid, was comfortable enough to ask him a question. "Why are you laying there like that?" Henry carefully said, not wanting to upset him. "Oh, I started to feel a little dizzy. Too much sun, I guess. I decided to lay down for a while, at least until I felt better. Then I'll get up and go home." Henry wanted so badly to ask him, was he dead? Was he a ghost? Was he going to get up and try to eat him like the undead zombie ghouls do in the movies? Henry really didn't feel that way, though. In fact, he started to believe that Brandon was just a kid who needed a friend, and maybe he didn't even know he was dead. He didn't want to tell him that he thought he was dead. He didn't want to take a chance in angering him. "Do you go to school around here? I've never seen you before," Henry asked, sounding more relaxed now. "No, I go to Kempner." Kempner was the next town over. "My grandma lives here, though, so we come to visit her a lot. And when we're here, I always come to pick berries. Do you go to school here?" "Yeah, I go to Schultz. It's not too far from my house. I can even ride my bike to school." "You like the A-team?" Henry asked, looking at Brandon's shirt. Brandon's eyes lit up again. "Yeah, BA's my favorite," referring to the brutish character played by Mr. T on the show. Henry, also an A-team fan, became excited about this topic as well. "I like Murdoch. He's crazy and funny," referring to the jokester pilot on the show. Brandon's eyes, for the first time, left Henry's and looked down at his hand. "Hey, what's that?" "What's what?" "That blue thing in your hand." Henry looked down to see the little blue ball in his hand. He had completely forgotten about it. "Oh, this is my blue bouncy ball. I always take it with me when I go crawfishing." Henry lifted it up to show him. Brandon then slowly raised his arm. He was very stiff. As his arm lifted, it made a sickening, cracking noise. The sound made Henry shudder, but Brandon paid it no mind. He didn't even seem to notice it. His elbow slightly bent. He opened his hand, only to release more cracking sounds. It sounded like someone stepping on a crab shell. Henry did his best to ignore it, but the look on his face was that of utter disgust. Brandon, again, seemed to not notice any of this. He just smiled and waited for Henry to toss him the ball. Time seemed to stand still as Henry thought about what he should do. He hesitatingly raised his arm and took a deep breath and tossed the ball to Brandon. He watched as the ball seemed to coast through the air in slow motion and land in the dead boy's hand. He felt as though he'd gone deaf. He didn't even hear the sound of the ball making contact with Brandon's hand. What now? What's he going to do? Henry thought to himself. Brandon looked at the unremarkable ball, studied it, and tossed it back to Henry. This began a back and forth game of toss between them. This went on for a while. They talked about Henry's family, crawfishing, and their favorite cartoons. Like, who'd you rather see in a fight? Freddy Krueger or Jason? Or who'd you rather ride in? Optimus Prime or Kit from the show Knight Rider? Henry had seemingly forgotten that he was having a conversation with a dead kid, and the smell didn't even bother him anymore. He was just enjoying hanging out and talking to his new friend. When it came time for Henry to toss the ball back, the ball slipped Brandon's hand and landed next to him on the ground. Brandon tried to reach for it, but the lack of mobility in his arm wouldn't allow him to do it, and his body wouldn't move. He looked at Henry, not saying a word, but asking for help with his eyes. Henry started to make his way over to him to pick up the ball, but then stopped. He looked at Brandon, realizing that he was about to approach a talking corpse. The fear and reality of the situation set in. Maybe this is a setup. What if I get close to him and he grabs me and bites me and infects me? Will I become like him? The thoughts raced through Henry's mind. A feeling of panic grew. He looked at Brandon only to see that signature smile on his face, and something inside Henry told him that Brandon was none of those monstrous things. He was just a kid who needed a friend. Henry slowly made his way over to him, Brandon's eyes now fixed on Henry again. Henry knelt down beside him to retrieve the ball, and there was the deafness again. No sound except the pounding of his heart. He slowly reached for the ball, keeping his eyes on Brandon, and Brandon keeping his eyes on him. Henry gently cuffed the ball in his hand, and then he felt Brandon's hand grab his arm. Henry flinched and grimaced as if in pain. He looked at the cold, pale hand with dirty, chipped fingernails. Then he looked at Brandon's face. He was no longer smiling. Now, he actually looked scared. "Thank you, Henry," he said in a tone of appreciation that Henry probably never would understand. He released Henry's arm and opened his hand to take the ball. Henry placed it in his hand, stood up, and saw Brandon smiling again. They played catch and talked for a little while longer until Henry noticed the sun starting to go down. Well, I gotta get going. I have to be home before the streetlights come on. What are you gonna do? I figure I'll just lay around here for a little while longer. Hey, maybe you can come back tomorrow and hang out. I don't know. Maybe if my mom doesn't put me to work doing something and I can get out early enough. Henry was actually considering it. Hey, you probably don't want to stay out here till dark. The mosquitoes get really bad out here, he warned. Brandon didn't say anything. He just gave a sly smirk that said, "We both know I don't have to worry about mosquitoes." Brandon went to toss the ball back to Henry, but Henry stopped him mid-motion. "You keep it," he said, with a look of sincerity on his face. Brandon dropped his arm and clutched the ball tightly. Henry turned and walked back to the bike and started to pack up. He pulled the net out of the water, which was now filled with crawfish, but he didn't care. There was no excitement about it. It meant nothing to him right now. He put the crawfish in the ice cream buckets and finished loading up. Henry turned around to look at Brandon one more time. "Bye, Brandon. See you later," he yelled out. But Brandon didn't respond. He just laid there in the brush, fumbling with the ball. The sun had gone down even more now, and Henry knew he needed to get on the road quickly to beat those streetlights. He jumped on the bike and began to ride out. He took one more look at his new friend, still lying there, then rode off. Once Henry got out of the park, the complete ride home seemed like a blur. When he finally pulled up into the yard, he didn't even remember the ride home at all. His mind had been completely hijacked by the experience at the park. Looking into Brandon's dead eyes, the smell, and him talking. How could this have been? It went against everything that was supposed to be real. He rode up to the porch, hopping off his bike. He grabbed the 2 ice cream buckets of crawfish out of the wagon. He felt nervous walking up to the steps. He went to grab the doorknob and paused. What would he tell his family? He thought. Would they even believe him? His father only believed that which he could see and knew to be real. His brother would only make fun of him and say he was trying to get attention. And his mother would say something along the lines of, he got too much sun and he needed to limit his time outside. Henry couldn't have that. He was conflicted in what he should do. But how could he keep something like this to himself? It was one heck of a secret to keep. But maybe this experience was not to be shared. Though it was something that would change him forever, maybe it was his and his alone. He decided not to tell his family, or anyone else for that matter. Henry composed himself, turned the doorknob, and walked in. His mother was sitting in the living room on the phone, having a chat with one of her friends. She turned and looked at him, then at the clock on the wall, then back at him, with a look that said, "Boy, you're cutting it pretty close." "Let me call you back. Henry just walked in," she told whomever she was talking to on the phone, and placed the phone down softly on the hook. She stood up and walked over to him. He was expecting her to be a little fussy about him making it back so late, but she wasn't at all. "How was it out there today? Did you catch some big ones?" she asked. "I sure did," he said, while holding up the buckets of crawfish. She came closer to inspect them, then stopped and scrunched up her face. "Whoa, what in the world is that nasty smell? Is that you?" she said, covering her nose with a hand. Henry lifted his arms to his nose and smelled the spot where Brandon had grabbed him. His hands also had that dead smell on them from tossing the ball back and forth with Brandon. "Oh, yeah, I guess so. I'm a little stinky. It was a little hot out there today." The only thing he could think of to say, "Well, put those in the kitchen and go take a bath. Dinner should be done by the time you get finished." Henry went into the kitchen and placed the buckets on the deep freezer, then headed for his room. "Where's Dad and GJ?" "Your dad will be home soon. He went to go help a friend fix something on a boat, and GJ is staying the night with his friend Marty. Now you go get cleaned up. You smell like you've been playing with something dead. During dinner, Henry hardly said a word, nor did he have much of an appetite. He usually inhaled his food like a starving POA, but tonight he was as distant as a burnt-out star, and it didn't go unnoticed. "Boy, you eating like a little rabbit tonight," his father said. Henry didn't even look up. He just swirled his fork around in his food, staring at it. "Well, he'd better eat something. I didn't cook all this food for nothing," his mother chimed in. "I guess I'm just not that hungry. Guess I ate too many berries at the park today. My stomach kind of hurts." Henry made this up quickly to excuse his lack of appetite. "What if I told you about eating those berries without washing them? They'll give you worms," his mother said while shaking her head in disapproval. "Well, try to eat a little something. I don't want you going to bed with a sour stomach full of dirty berries." His father positioned the food in his mouth in order to say something, looking like a cow chewing cud. "How'd you do out there today, boy?" But Henry once again had drifted off into his thoughts and didn't respond. "Henry!" His father's voice now raised. "Boy, are you okay?" "Oh, sorry, Dad. I'm just tired, I guess. Can I finish this up tomorrow? I'm just ready to go to bed and get some rest." "Yes, that's fine. Go ahead and put your plate in the kitchen. I'll pack it up for you later," his mother said. Henry stood up from the table and took his plate into the kitchen and said goodnight and went to his room. His parents continued their meal, completely oblivious to their son's amazing experience. Henry brushed his teeth, got into bed, and pulled the covers up to his chest. Henry laid there at night, staring up at the ceiling, thinking about what had happened that day. He was confused, scared, and sad all at the same time. He could feel his eyes starting to water, then the tears running down his face. He didn't even know why he was crying, but he couldn't help it. He couldn't stop. But he felt it was okay to cry for Brandon, okay to cry for his new friend, who he knew he'd never see again because he was dead. Had this all really happened, he thought to himself? Had he really befriended a dead kid? Yes, he had. As much as he wanted it not to be so, he knew it had actually happened. Henry knew he would never forget this. He eventually rolled over and drifted off into deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning when Henry woke up, the bright sun shining through the curtains shone onto his face. He sat up in bed and yawned and had a big stretch. He turned to get out of bed and stopped before his feet hit the floor. Yesterday never happened, he told himself. Just move on and forget about it, Henry. But he knew he would never forget about it. He got up and went to the living room. He could smell coffee brewing and breakfast in the air. His father would be gone to work by now, and his mother would be watching the morning news. "Morning, Ma," he said while yawning again. "Henry, come look," his mother said, her eyes wide and focused. She was pointing at the TV. "They found that boy I was telling you about, the one who went missing. His name was Brandon Tate. They found him dead in some park." Henry hurried over to the TV and saw the police in the corner taking away a black body bag off the ground. He felt like he was having an out-of-body experience watching this. His jaw dropped in disbelief. His stomach felt like it was going to fall out. Then he saw something that he recognized, something very familiar to him. As the men walked out of camera shot, on the ground behind the news reporter and the spot where the body had been taken away from was the blue ball. Hi guys, this is Devin King, and thank you so much for your support of the channel. If you enjoy this content and like the videos, then click the subscribe button and also give the video a like and share. And until next time, be good to each other. It's a scary world out there.